And because it's being live streamed, right? So you might have to receive an information there that if you don't want to stay, you can leave, right? But you know, feel free to be here, right? An information there that if you don't want to stay, you can leave, right? All right. Okay, so we're now live on YouTube. So hello everyone. We're now transmitting live at many channels, right? So we are here on my YouTube channel. We're also on SoJava's YouTube channel. So thanks a lot, SoJava, for transmitting here with us. We're also transmitting on Gabriel's YouTube channel. So thanks a lot, Gabriel, for receiving this. And Max, right? Max Ahuda. He also liberated his YouTube channel for us. So thanks a lot, Max, for doing this. It's all great, right? So, Gabriel, can you talk a little bit about SoJava? So Gabriel's going to say a quick hello about SoJava here for all of you guys.
Hello everyone, how are you doing, guys? SoJava is the best community in Java around the world to you use, enter and participate. And this week is more specific. We realize the best event in SoJava and this year is SoJava on campus. And at this event, we invite a lot of persons. If you have desire to give you freestyle, if you want to give talks, you can send messages to me, and I try put you in this event. And this is a very amazing. This is a great channel to you share your knowledges, make networking in general, and this is a great opportunity for you. And I think that I have more things to say about SoJava, and we have programs. I will send to Bruno now a link in the SoJava Discord, and you can find me and find Max and find any people to help you with your problems about Java.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot, Gabriel. Thanks for SoJava for hosting us here and being here with us, right? So I'm also have here my good friend Ronnie. So Ronnie is the CTO of Tigma.ai. Hey Ronnie, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Great to be here.
So Ronnie, Tigma is a company that's working a lot to get developers to be better developers, right? So let me start by asking that question. So why do you think that we should always be improving our skills? Why it's important for that?
I think it should be the default mode. Like there's kind of a saying, if you're not going forward, you're going back. And I think definitely with dev, that is the case. And it's not just about improving skills, it's about kind of learning something new and kind of getting a little bit out of your comfort zone that I think is critical, because that's the only way that you can kind of evolve and grow as a developer. If you're standing still, well, it's no fun, but also kind of you're not going to be more impactful around yourself.
That's great. Now, Ronnie, we did have several questions here that people submit before they join here. And so I want to start with some of those questions, right? Because I think that, I know that we're going to have a presentation about continuous feedback, and it's going to be, it's going to be great. But I'm thinking here that there are some questions here that we could start with, and so there's a couple of people thinking that the focus question, right? So Son, for example, asked it, my biggest challenge to determine what I need to focus on learning, right? Also, Stefan did ask, figure out what the most needed skills in the current job on the market. And Abdinor said, I'm not always sure I'm going the right direction, right? So I think that's an interesting question to first you get started is, how do we focus, right? How do we know what's important? How do we focus on something that's going to be interesting for us, that's the market's going to accept. So how do you focus, Ronnie? How do you decide to build a company with a specific focus, right? With so many technologies, so many things going around, how do we decide how to focus on things?
That's a great question. And focus is a big problem because, today we have so many different technologies and kind of skills to pick up. And to me, the main guideline for that is to try to see what would be potentially something that would help me, not in theory, but with the work that I'm doing now. So, for example, I could decide that I want to start learning, I don't know, Ruby. And that's great. I actually think it's a great idea, but it won't necessarily help me with my current tasks. So there has to be an adjacent or a parallel to what I'm doing currently. And the reason is that way I can also kind of take it beyond theory and into practice. If I'm doing a science project, it's actually, it contributes to my growth, but not as much as if I'm finding something that has a relevance, either technologically or process-wise or thinking-wise, or it doesn't matter how, onto what I'm doing today as a developer. And I've seen developers do something like introduce a new meeting into the agile process in their work environments because they thought it would be more helpful. And that's kind of, a non-technical example. Or I could, if what I'm working on is doing database queries, I could look into more information I could get out of the database to understand more what I'm doing. So there are a lot of examples, and the guideline should be, is it relevant and impactful to what I'm doing today at work, to my specific tasks?
Okay, that's very, very cool. All right, so one thing I want to say, if you're watching us on YouTube right now, on any of the channels, right? And if you want to join us here on Zoom to ask questions and participate, right? What I'm going to ask you to do is send a message to me on my Twitter, @JavaMan, send a DM to me, and I'm going to send you a link to the Zoom so you can join us here, right? So if you're watching this on YouTube, message me on @JavaMan on Twitter, and I will send you the link so you can be here with us, right? Of course, if you're watching this on the live version, if you're watching this recorded, sorry, it's going to be another time. All right, cool. And I see Marcus join us here, so hey, Marcus. All right, so Ronnie, I think that's one of the things that we have to do with continuous feedback, right, is this whole notion that we need to improve, right? We need to be better. And when we talk about focus, right, is continuous feedback a way for us to go deeper and deeper in our own focus, or it is a way for us to go broad, right? So what's best to do? Use continuous feedback to go deeper or to go broad, or both?
So I think the main problem that continuous feedback tries to solve is that oftentimes we as developers don't know that much about our code. We wrote it, we see it running in our environment, and if there is something wrong, we hear about it, but that's the sum of it. So here is a different paradigm or a different way to develop, where we should have always kind of a deep understanding of, okay, this is my code, I own it. How does it work? How does it run? How does it run in production? How does it run in test? Being able to answer all of those questions all the time without having to think about it or go look is what continuous feedback is about. And only if we understand our code can we continually improve it. So, I was just talking to a developer who was very proud of the code he rolled into production, and he was kind of showing off a lot of and he really did some cool things. But unfortunately, he had a connection pool issue, and he was not aware of it because, in his local environment, he wasn't running out of connections. All of these holdups in kind of processing requests weren't happening. But as soon as he started looking at the data, he suddenly understood that there is such a thing as a connection pools, because he wasn't kind of aware of all of the kind of subtleties of how to configure it, and B, how it impacts his work. So eventually, not only was he able to correct his code and kind of, from the code perspective, slowly evolve it into something better, but in his own personal growth, he suddenly understood another aspect of scaling systems that he wasn't aware of, simply because he wasn't looking. So once he's done that, he was able to both grow as a developer and improve his code, which is kind of the tactical goal as well.
Okay, that's totally awesome. And now there's one more thing here that I wanna talk to you before we go to your presentation, right? There's a question from Sunil, and Sunil talks a lot about, you know, the endless churn to catch up, right, with the latest technology, the greatest things, right? And he talks about, you know, there's lots of things going on, and companies require more knowledge, so you get paid, right? So when we start talking about continuous feedback, are we really building into ourselves this craziness of, you know, always improving and trying to get more money, and it's like, you know, this rat race all the time? You know, is that the way? Is that why we want to continuous feedback?
So I think that to understand why, I don't think it's a question of want. I think it's a question of need. So with continuous feedback, the question is, how comfortable are you practically developing with your eyes closed? So if I were to ask you to go and from your house to the supermarket with your eyes closed and there are roads to cross, you would probably not take me up on that offer. And to me, the analogy is very much a very fitting one, because if you're developing and there's no information back, you're basically developing with your eyes closed, and your code will hit the cars on the street, and there will be train wrecks and there will be issues. And more than that, your basic skills won't grow because you won't understand what is happening around you. So that is why I think it's kind of beyond something that you would want to do. It's something that you need to do, and many teams don't do it, and that's fine, but eventually they kind of run into more and more issues, and they also don't learn from what is actually happening. And as to what you said about kind of more and more technologies, that's absolutely true, but at the same time, I think what we don't need is a lot of very superficial knowledge, different knowledges that don't actually amount to something concrete and practical. So it's okay to look around, to be curious, but you need to have at least a specific number of skills where you really understand them, you really grope what is happening, you can really kind of have an intuition about how it will work. And that only comes with data, that only comes with understanding how it works, and it can't and you can't get to that level of mastery just by kind of running your code without looking. So there are various ways to look, you know, testing is one of them, and an experience in live systems, but there are other ways, and this is what we'll talk about today.
Okay, that's totally awesome, man. Now, the one thing that I'm seeing here, you're talking about, you know, developing with your eyes closed. I love this analogy because the reality is that, I love this analogy because the reality is that, oh, there's going to be more noise here, right? So, because it doesn't matter how well you know your path to the supermarket, you cannot go there with your eyes closed, right? You know, because there's other things going on all the time. So, and I see this, I see my good friend Marcos Westergren here, and Marcos talks a lot about observability. And so, Marcos, do you want to talk a little bit about that? And you know, you wrote a great article about observability the other day. how do you see observability on our code, Marcus?
Sure, I can do some small story. I've been working a bit with Ronnie and Digma as a volunteer to test their application beta, and realized how important it is with observability, and especially when the frameworks we're using get more and more complicated. They're easy to use, but there's so much stuff going on behind the scenes. You don't know what really is going on. So I think this observability is getting more and more important. You can get something up and running really quickly if you use all the frameworks that exist, but do you really know what your code is doing? And with this observability, you have that power. You can see, all right, okay, this hibernate call is actually n plus 1. So I didn't know that. So it's very easy to see, and this plugin helps us a lot with identifying stuff like that. And another analogy, similar to the one going to the supermarket, I experienced this summer traveling, and the airline lost my luggage. So we reported it lost, and we got the initial feedback. We will get it to you tonight. It will be on a flight coming later, the same evening. Nothing appeared. We didn't get the bag. I got a phone number I could call to check the status. Nobody answered. So I had no clue where my bag were. So if I had some observability on my own luggage, I could make decisions. Where is the bag? When will I get it? Will I get it before I go home? Will I get it before I go to the next town? Do I need to buy things? What do I need to buy? It's the same with the code. If we don't know what's going on, how can we then make decisions on what to do? So it's really important, I think. And it's also very easy to see now when you get this information in your face directly in your IDE.
That's totally awesome, man. And it's interesting because when you talk about observability in the case of the luggage, right? You know, it is something that is there. You know, the luggage is there somewhere, right?
Yes.
But you don't see it. And I think it has a very good analogy of the code, right? Because your code is there. You know it's there. You know it's doing something. But if you don't know exactly what it is, you don't know it's there, you don't know what's going on, then how can you actually use that code to solve problems, right? All right. Okay. So Sunny's here thanking us for answering the question. So thanks a lot, Sunny, for actually making the question, right? And so that's totally awesome. There's more questions here, guys, that we're gonna go over. But I know that Ronnie, you know, is really have this amazing content about observability and about continuous feedback. So let's hear a little bit from Ronnie, and then we come back to do more questions, right? Ronnie, it's with you, man. If you want to share your screen.
Yeah, if you can enable me to share, I'll share.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So yes, let me. Yes, you can do this now.
Okay, let me try.
Sorry about that. All right. And
No worries
so,
at all.
and guys, if there's other questions that you want to ask, come on, feel free to go ahead and ask on the chats or raise your hands. Yes, we see your screen now, man. Yes, perfect. Okay.
Perfect.
If there's any question or anything like this, I'll let you know.
Great. So thank you, Marcos, and hi, everyone. Great to be here. Just a little bit about myself and how I got to kind of this, to be talking about it. So I've been a developer for almost 25 years. Most of my work, I actually worked on many different languages. I was a Java developer, I was a .NET developer, I was a Python developer for a while. And I also kind of, my personal tragedy is that I really dig into things and I kind of find it hard to stay at the code level. So when I was coding, I always worried about kind of, why are we building this? What are the use cases? So I became a product manager for a while. And then I said, well, that's terrible. I don't write any code anymore. And coding is what I like to do. So I became a coder again. But then I went back into product management. So I've been kind of oscillating between those two roles and trying to find ways to combine product management with development. And throughout that effort, I actually noticed several things related to feedback because, and this is kind of a really important point I'll get back to later, as product managers, we have actually much more sources of feedback than developers. So I can confidently say that as a product manager, if I want to know how the feature I rolled out is doing, I have many more tools and mechanics to do it versus a developer who wants to know technically how his code is doing. And I'll get into that later, but it's kind of a little bit what fueled this interest of mine in how can we actually get to a different dev process where we are much more kind of in contact with our code and have this and don't need to code with our eyes closed, to use the same analogy. So before I start, I want to talk about something else, which is very much related in my mind. And that is the 10x developer. So I know many of you are kind of familiar with the term of this developer who is 10x better than the other engineers and so on. And personally, I've met a 10x developer once, or so I thought. And this was a person in my team, and he was, I think, borderline genius. And you knew he was a 10x developer because he would sit down, he would start writing the code, then he would delete everything after like writing 1,000 code lines, write it again. Then after a while, he would just delete everything again and write it once more. And that's it. And it was perfect. No need to debug. No need to troubleshoot. He had the capacity of rolling out perfect code each time. And that was impressive, except that if you started trying to use that code, you found that it was so ingenious, it was barely usable. So eventually, nobody could read it. Nobody could understand it. We called it naturally obfuscated code because it was so ingenious, it would take another genius to decipher it. And I'm mentioning that as an example of the fact the technical skills are not what moves the needle. They're a big part of it. You want people to have great technical skills. You want to work with great developers. But in this sense, this is an extreme example of how somebody actually had all of the skills. He was genius level. He was able to roll out the perfect code each time. But he wasn't making our development easier. And if we were able to roll out a feature faster, but nobody was able to support it, then it doesn't kind of meet the requirements of a 10x developer. And I'll get back to the notion or concept of what is a 10x developer. What is a developer that actually makes an impact on the organization? And in my mind, it's very much tied in with the concept of continuous feedback, and I'll explain why. So I want to tell you another story, and this is a story of a different developer in the team. Let's call him Bill. And Bill has been charged with a very simple, mundane task, which is he needs to develop a feature, then he needs to roll it into production. I'm sure everybody here on this call kind of faced the same need to develop a feature and roll it into production. And it used to be that our kind of ability to do that was very, very, let's say it wasn't as complicated in the past. And what I mean by that at least when I got started, it was developing a feature, maybe testing it a little bit locally, then handing it over to the guys across the hall in the QA department, and you forget about it. But things are different, 25 years later after I started coding. And today we have this whole concept of a CI pipeline. We have this concept of writing unit tests, which it's really important that we're doing, and sometimes writing integration tests. And developers also care about deployment and how to deploy their code. And this goes all the way into production. But the question is, what will Bill do, or what will you do the minute after you rolled your code into production? So you went through all of these stages, you kind of wrote the test, you created a pipeline, you clicked that merge button. There is a phrase, push and pray. So you pushed and prayed, you've merged your code into the main branch. It gets deployed eventually into production. What do you do next? And I'm going to pause for a second. I'm very curious to hear what you guys would say and what you would do next. And by the way, are you having any trouble hearing me? There is a little bit of noise next to me. If it's problematic, I'll try to find another spot.
Ronnie, your voice is loud and clear. It's
Okay.
it's me that it's a problem, not you.
Okay, no worries. So what do you guys think? Sorry, I can't see the chat, but if somebody can say,
So Andres says, see the logs, the next thing he would do.
that's actually a perfect response. I didn't meet a lot of folks who that's the next thing that they would do. And I have to say that usually what Bill would do, and this is what 99% of the teams I've worked with did after rolling in a feature into production, is to move on to the next feature. And it was so, the problem is so kind of distinct that sometimes people miss out on the fact that their code isn't even being executed. Maybe there was a bad if statement, maybe they missed kind of a condition. But I have personally been witness to kind of very well written code being deployed into production, and everybody's happy, and the roadmap is progressing, but that function never gets called because nobody's actually checked that it's getting called. And I think there is this whole concept about the definition of done and kind of done versus done and so on. But the question is, where do the boundaries of the definition of done stand for developers? Are you done when you wrote the test and you deployed, or are you done when you already know that your code is working and you already learned things about it? And I think this is a very big paradigm shift. And we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail, because the problem is that almost exclusively what Bill would do, what the other developers would do, is just move on to the next task. And I have to say that as a product manager, when I was a product manager, I was kind of sharing that or the blame in that, because organizations are very forward-looking. And that means that we always think about the next feature. We always think about what we need to accomplish on our roadmap. As a product manager, I was measured by how fast and how able I was to manage the roadmap and get to where we needed to. So when the developer told me, hey, I'm done with this feature, I didn't ask him, hey, what's the feedback you got on it? Do you think it's good? Is it scaling? No, I would ask him, what about the next feature that I've been waiting for? And that's a system problem. But I think beyond that, we need to think about the problem of feedback in general, because if you think about kind of the interactions you have with the code, there's always room for feedback. Like if you think about when you start coding and you're in the IDE and your code is running even locally, there is a lot of information you can get from there. And if you're modifying code that was already running in production, then it's not necessarily a straight line. One of the biggest, I think, miscalculations in thinking about programming is to think about it as something linear that goes from point A to B. But it's always going on. Like there's always feedback. There's always information from testing, from production, from my own environment. The question is, when do I use it and how do I use it? Now, here are the questions that I wanted Bill to ask. So the minute after he deployed to production, I wanted him to ask, did my code work well? Is anyone using it? Did it change anything in the code base? Did it improve life for everyone? Did it introduce a regression? These are the things that I want every developer to ask. But somehow it doesn't happen. Now I want to tell you a more optimistic story. And this is a story about another developer. And that developer did something unspeakable. I was looking at kind of our system logs at one point in time, and I was noticing it was completely spammed with numbers. So somebody was printing out numbers to the console at a crazy rate. And I traced that down to a piece of code that was written by one of my developers. And this is not a guy who's genius level. This is not a guy who kind of has this savant-like intelligence. But he decided to add a log statement. He had a background task, and as he was coding and adding information or adding code to that specific task, he was measuring how much time the entire task took to run and to finish. And I asked him, well, why did you do that? And he said, well, I wanted to know if my changes were actually influencing everyone in a negative way. I wanted to see if, as I'm writing the code, I'm looking at this stream of numbers, and I expect it to be anything from 200 to 400, and then milliseconds. And if I see that it's suddenly 800 milliseconds, then I know my code changes are doing something bad, and I need to re-examine them. So that, to me, is the property of a 10x developer. There are many things that are wrong in this story. He was using the wrong tools to do it, because writing to the console is probably not the more scalable, effective way to do it. He was probably kind of he should have consulted with the rest of the team. But think about it, that I was working in a team of about 10 developers, and only one of the developers even had this feeling of ownership or responsibility or kind of awareness of how much in the dark he was when he was coding, that he decided that he needed that information. And for him, he would be a 10x developer if only he had the right toolings to accomplish what he wanted to do. And this is a perfect segue to talk about OpenTelemetry and why I think it's really important. So how many here have heard or are using OpenTelemetry?
You guys can raise your hand if you want to say, or just say in the chats.
Yeah, if you've heard about it or are using it, just raise your hand. Oh, Marcus, of course. Cool. So I think that's one of the personal tragedies, is that OTEL is actually extremely popular and extremely well supported, but not enough developers still know about it. And this is my I get angry just talking about it, but this is my own personal frustration, because we have people in the organization that are in different functions. We have ops guys, we have IT people, we have folks that are SREs responsible for the production environment and so on. And I have to tell you, these guys all know what OpenTelemetry is. They own this observability field. And as a result, or maybe in a related way, developers are kind of left out of the equation. And I think by now in this talk, you kind of realize why why observability or knowing what your code does is so critical. And yet somehow OpenTelemetry remains inaccessible to developers. And I think there is absolutely no reason for that, because it is actually a very accessible and supported technology. So why is OpenTelemetry important? OpenTelemetry is important first and foremost, not because it's something revolutionary. It's not a new concept in observability. It's not doing something that previous technologies were doing. It's actually a kind of a confluence of different or a joining together of two previous standard, open census and open tracing. So it's not like a revolution in how we do observability or how we collect data about the code. It's extremely important because everybody agrees on it. That's it. And that has never happened before. It's open source. It's a specification that everybody can use. It's not like a proprietary Datadog or Grafana or New Relic type of data that you kind of need to know to interact with. It's open, it's supported, and because everybody agrees on it, all of the different frameworks and libraries are just busy providing support for it. And if you look at kind of the matrix of, or their support matrix of what they kind of automatically collect data about without even having to change a single line of code, just because you're using the Postgres driver, you're going to get Postgres data. Just because you're using the Mongo driver, you're going to get Mongo data. And if you're using Quarkus, and if you're using Spring Boot, or if you're using Micronaut or Drop Wizard, or if you're using Kafka, all of these different technologies, because there is no need to select between 10 different standards, they just added OTEL support. And as a result of that, it's more like, to go back to our analogy about coding in the dark, it's kind of like flipping the light switch on, because all you need to do is enable it, and suddenly you have a lot of data. And what type of data it is, and I'll give you a few examples, but one of the interesting bits of data you can get about your code using OTEL is tracing data. Now, who here is familiar with tracing or has used tracing in the past? Again, just raise your hand. Great, Marcus, and anybody else? Well, perfect, because I think it's a great opportunity to learn something new. And tracing is actually a really important technology. what it essentially allows you to do is to see and understand how your code works. Now, the more complicated the code, the less easy it is to just debug it every time, because when you're debugging, you're basically shifting between instances in time. You're not seeing the complete picture. And a trace allows you to follow through what your code is doing. So we're going to look at some code in a second. And in my code, I'm using a Spring Boot application. I'm actually using the Pet Clinic, and I've extended it somewhat with additional functionality. And what a trace allows me to do is to understand what a request looks like, what a flow that's going through my system looks like, what my code is doing. Let's say when somebody triggers an API call. And in terms of terminology, there is what we call a trace, which is essentially what happened throughout that entire flow. And this can span multiple microservices. That's why it's called a distributed trace. So I can actually see, okay, first it was calling the Java Spring endpoint, then it was calling that function, and it was calling that function. Then there was an HTTP call. Then there was kind of a database call and so on. Or I can actually see to a finer level of granularity, and the next level of kind of hierarchy is spans. And spans just describe activities within that trace. So I can understand, okay, first there was the HTTP request, then there was a checking permission process, and this is how long it took. And these are the errors that I saw there. And then there was validating, and then there was the rendering. And all of these are kind of like an X-ray. So suddenly, when I look at what just happened, I activated my X-ray vision. And this is kind of what an open source tool called Jaeger, this is how it would render my request. And I'm able to drill into the entire timeline of what just happened and understand exactly where the issues were. Also, it gives me some visibility that I just didn't have before, even if there are no issues. So I'm looking at a specific piece of code, a specific function, and I can't even say as a developer, and again, very frustrating because other functions in the organizations have that info, but I can't say very quickly, is this a problem? Is this a bottleneck in my request? Is this something that I should be worried about optimizing? Or is this something that is actually negligible in terms of its impact on performance, or in terms of errors, or in terms of who's using it? So what tracing allows us to do is it helps us solve the problem of the missing feedback. Now, how would I use tracing, or what is the vision here? How would we use tracing to get more feedback? And this is where I was kind of thinking there is something wrong here in terms of the models that I know. So you probably are all familiar with the DevOps loop, with kind of the infinity sign that, you know, I by now became almost kind of a cliche. And as I was looking at the infinity sign diagram, and this is just one of the first pictures that come up when you search online for the DevOps loop and tools, I noticed something that's really odd about this picture. Now, if you look, you'll see that continuous feedback, which is what I'm talking about, is actually in this picture. It's right in the center. It's supposed to take data from production back to your code. But somehow there is only one tool associated with it, and it's Salesforce first. And I still didn't figure that one out. So obviously, this is something we thought about. Like, the concept of continuous feedback is not something that doesn't exist in our modeling. It's just something that for some reason is not implemented. Now, with OpenTelemetry, we can actually make that work quite easily. So enabling OpenTelemetry, luckily, doesn't require us to change any code, especially if we're just talking about dev and test, and we don't need to worry about production just yet. So these 3 lines here is everything that needs to happen, everything you need to do in order to start collecting data about your code and not code in the dark. In order to be able to be that 10x developer in collecting or knowing and understanding how your code works, and in being able to get that advantage or get that way to basically make sure that your code changes are working, that they've improved life for everyone, and that you roll out higher quality code. And it's also something that you can contribute to the organization around you. Because remember those 10 developers and 9 of them were just moving on to the next feature? You can be that one developer that doesn't, that actually has that ownership of the code, that moves the needle. And in order to do that, all you need to do is change 3 lines and you have data. And this is amazing to me because, you know, if I told you, hey guys, you need to go and install that framework, and then you need to change the code to support it, and then you need to add a few more things, and then you need to, I don't know, go and run some process every time. No, it's not that complicated. It's basically setting an environment variable and then running your application. In a second, I'll show you how what we're trying to do is actually making it even simpler. So the question is, how do we actually use OpenTelemetry or observability or data about our code when we're developing? And this is the most critical point of this discussion. Because so far I talked about, yeah, feedback is important, why it's meaningful, why if we don't get feedback, it's ridiculous because we're not improving and we're not owning our code and so on. But I haven't talked about how to actually use it. We have OpenTelemetry, we have the willingness, we have the ownership. How does my 10x developer, the guy who was writing a console log, how does he actually improve into having something better in order to track his code changes, in order to understand if he rolled out any issues and so on? So I actually really like this diagram where it kind of describes software development as a combination of debugging and rebugging. Because definitely, you know, as we roll out code changes, we're creating issues, we're creating problems, and these are the things that we want to watch out for. And in this first phase, I'm going to show you how with a little bit of OSS toolings, I can actually avoid the need to constantly debug, which is something that requires effort and attention, and start getting a stream of information about how my code is doing. So for this example, I decided I'm going to take the pet clinic, and we'll take a look at the code in a sec. But I'm going to take the pet clinic example and add a different or an additional component to it. This is just because the pet clinic example is a little bit more too simplistic. So what I wanted to do was take the pet clinic example, add an additional complication. In this case, I decided, you know, pets needs vaccines. Hopefully you're vaccinating your pets. So let's add an additional API, an external one, like a vaccine record API. And let's be able to kind of work with it in order to get the most up-to-date vaccination data for our pets, and then save that in the database. So all in all, not a very complicated feature. I created a mock API that will let me actually visualize everything that has to do with or to access all of the data that has to do with my pets, and how they're and the latest vaccination status. And I updated the pet clinic example. We'll see the code in a second. And then right now, if I just run this example, and let's say I want to add an additional pet to one of my owners.
Ronnie, why are you doing this? I'm just letting you know, because Gabrielle was just telling me that we have a hard stop for the So Java streaming in 5 minutes, right?
Oh,
So if you can in the next 5 minutes, can just kind of come to a conclusion, then we're just
yeah.
gonna cut the So Java stream and then we continue here, no problem. But just let you know this.
Okay, so jumping to the end, we can kind of see how we can actually create this flow where behind the scenes. I'm using OpenTelemetry, and in this case, I'm also using a plugin called Digma, which is what we're working on. So one of my motivations is how can we create a flow by which we can always collect the data about the code and make it even more accessible for developers. So first of all, to get to what I'm showing you, all you need to do is install a plugin, and that's it. And then the plugin will take care of everything, even those kind of lines of code to enable OpenTelemetry. So there is an observability toggle. When it's on, we'll collect data. When it's off, we won't collect data. That's it. And the next thing it allows you to do is actually it digests all of the data and makes it possible for you to see how your code is actually behaving. So if I went and I checked specifically, for example, the controller and the action that I'm just working on for creating a new, in this case, let me see, it is in the pet controller, sorry. For creating a new pet, I can immediately see information about that code. I can see that I have an n+1 select problem. I can see the duration breakdown, and I can see a lot of data about my code that I was not able to see previously. So essentially what we've done is take all of that data from observability and process it and make it into something continuous, something that I don't need to actually spend time in order to get to, so that every developer, without adding log messages, without doing anything, will always have access to all of the data. And they can always look into any specific function, and they can look at data from multiple environments, and they can see exactly how that function is behaving. They can understand if there is an issue, what is the issue. They can actually see all of the logs about kind of how is that function behavior, how are my code changes actually kind of influencing the current behavior, and just make that data into something that's deeply integrated into your work. And that is all what we're trying to do. Basically, take developers who had no idea about how their code is running, and we saw it on this call, right? Nobody here was using OpenTelemetry. Nobody is using the wealth of tools that are able to analyze how your code is doing. The only guys who are using it are IT, ops, and SREs. So what this plugin will allow you to do is it's free. It's a free plugin, by the way. It doesn't cost anything, and it's also local. It doesn't send anything to the cloud. And what it allows you to do is essentially analyze your code in runtime all the time. And whenever you create an issue, see it. Whenever you're entering a place that's a bottleneck for the entire flow, see it. If you're going to affect other places, understand which other places in the code you're going to affect, and so on. So just in the last minute, I'd like you to invite you, and Marcus, who was on the call previously, is actually a great example of that 10x developer who doesn't just go on to the next feature, but actually uses tools, including Digma, in order to analyze his code and how it works and be able to own it and to provide a much better impact to the organization by doing that. And one of the things that Digma relies on is feedback from developers who want to take that same journey, because by listening to you, we can hear kind of what are the things that are important to know and tell about our code in runtime. So it would be great if you guys would like to join the Digma beta. That's also absolutely free. You can also get Digma right now. All you need is IntelliJ Community or Ultimate, it doesn't matter, and Java. But if you want to join the beta, you'll be working more closely with us on basically understanding the use cases, and the contributions of Marcus and the rest of the team of the beta are enormous, as they're also kind of helping out the project and learning a lot about how to kind of work with this type of information, but also specifying and contributing from their own experience as developers. So if you want to be a part of the Digma development, this is kind of a personal invitation for the guys for everybody on this call. So all you need to do is basically visit this URL digma.ai/beta and register there. It will actually schedule some time in my calendar in order to start that process. And all we'll do is basically see and learn how we can improve both Digma and use Digma to improve your code. Or if you're just interested in testing it out and learning more about your code in general, you can just get Digma from the IDE marketplace. So just go into your settings and then look for in the marketplace, search up Digma, and it will just pop up. And this is everything you need to do in order to get started and get more information about your code. And hopefully I met the timeline, right?
That's great, man. That's great. No, so everyone here in the call, we're gonna continue here. I want to hear a little bit from Marcos, how he's participating on the beta and all that. But we're just gonna end so for if you're watching us on the live stream on YouTube, you're gonna continue with the live stream from So Java on So Java na Campus. There's a new talk that's coming on. So thanks everyone for being here. If you want to join us here in the Zoom, you can always message me on BR Java Man on Twitter, and I will send you the link for you to join us here. Everyone that's here on the Zoom, you're gonna continue, right? So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm just gonna